The church bells tolled slow and hollow, echoing over the dusty frontier town as Clara stood beside the open grave, her white shawl drawn tightly around her shoulders to hide the trembling of her hands. The coffin beneath the earth held the man she had married 2 short years ago, a husband who had never truly looked at her with love, and who had left her with nothing but debts and whispered accusations. Around her, the townsfolk gathered in small, whispering knots, their pity sharp-edged and cruel. She heard the words as clearly as if they'd been shouted: barren, useless, a woman who couldn't even give him an heir. Her late husband's sister, a sharp-faced woman named Agnes, stepped forward as the final clump of dirt fell. Her voice loud enough for everyone to hear. "It's a blessing he didn't live to see his family name die with him," she sneered, her eyes glittering with spite. "You'll never be a mother, Clara. You've brought nothing but shame to this house." Laughter rippled through the crowd, mean and knowing, and Clara's vision blurred with tears. She wanted to run, to scream, to tell them that it wasn't her fault, that she had prayed and hoped and wept for a child who never came. But her throat locked tight with grief. Instead, she turned and fled, her boots kicking up little puffs of dry dust as she stumbled down the church steps and into the empty road. Behind her, voices rose in a cruel chorus, echoing the words that had been branded into her soul. "You'll never be a mother." She didn't stop running until the sound of them faded, until the edge of town blurred into open prairie, and the setting sun burned her tear-streaked cheeks. She fell to her knees beside a withered fence post, sobbing into her shawl, her heart breaking beneath the weight of loneliness. From the shadows of a nearby ridge, a horse's hooves thudded softly. A man had been watching the spectacle from a distance, his storm-gray eyes narrowing at the cruelty he'd witnessed. Caleb was a quiet cowboy who lived on the outskirts of town, a man with no family of his own and little use for gossip. But something about the sight of Clara crumpled in the dirt. Her small form shaking with grief struck a chord deep inside him. He dismounted silently, his boots crunching softly as he approached. "Ma'am," he said gently, his voice roughened by years of silence. Clara flinched, hugging herself tighter, not daring to lift her face. "Go away," she whispered hoarsely. "Haven't you all done enough?" Caleb crouched beside her, his shadow falling over her trembling form. "I'm not here to hurt you," he said firmly. "I saw what they did back there. That ain't right." His words were steady, but inside, anger burned hot and bright. Before Clara could respond, a distant, high-pitched wail pierced the twilight air. Both of them froze. The sound came again, thin, desperate, unmistakable. A baby's cry. Clara's head snapped up, her tear-reddened eyes wide with disbelief. "Did you hear that?" she gasped. Caleb nodded, already moving toward the sound, his long strides eating up the distance toward an abandoned wagon half hidden in the grass. When he reached it, his breath caught. A small bundle lay inside, squirming and wailing, its tiny fists flailing. There was no sign of its parents, only a trail of dried blood leading away into the darkness. Clara staggered to his side, her hands flying to her mouth. "Oh, sweet Lord," she whispered, her voice breaking. Caleb lifted the baby with infinite care, cradling it against his broad chest. The child's cries softened as it nestled into his warmth. He turned to Clara, his expression fierce with determination. Slowly, deliberately, he placed the baby into her trembling arms. Clara's breath caught as she gazed down at the tiny, fragile life resting against her heart. Caleb's voice was a low, steady promise as he met her eyes and said, "They told you you'd never be a mother. They were wrong. You are now." Clara's entire body trembled as she stared down at the tiny, warm bundle resting against her chest, the baby's breath soft and quick against her skin like a fragile bird. She couldn't seem to breathe, couldn't seem to make sense of what was happening. Only moments ago she had been running through the dust with her shame echoing in her ears, her heart shattered by the cruel words of the townsfolk. And now here was this helpless little life, depending on her as though she'd been chosen for it. Tears blurred her vision, spilling silently down her cheeks and soaking the corner of her white shawl. Caleb stood close beside her, his broad shoulders a protective wall against the open night. His storm-gray eyes scanned the prairie, sharp and wary. "There ain't no tracks leading back," he muttered, his voice low and tense. "Whoever left this child didn't stick around long enough to be found." Clara hugged the baby closer, instinctively rocking it, even though she had no idea how to soothe a crying infant. "Who would do such a thing?" she whispered, her voice breaking. "Leave a baby out here in the dark. They could have died." Caleb's jaw tightened, his face hard as weathered stone. "Someone desperate," he said grimly, "or someone cruel." The baby whimpered softly, its tiny hand clutching at Clara's shawl, and Clara felt something deep inside her shift, a fierce, protective surge rising in her chest. For the first time since her husband's death, she felt purpose. "We can't just leave them here," she said firmly, lifting her tear-streaked face to Caleb's. "Please, help me save them." Caleb nodded without hesitation. "I wasn't about to suggest otherwise." With gentle care, he guided Clara toward his waiting horse, a sturdy bay gelding named Jasper. "We'll ride to my cabin," he said. "It's isolated. Safe. You can rest and we'll figure out what to do come daylight." Clara hesitated, clutching the baby tighter. What if the ones who left this child come back for them? Caleb met her gaze steadily. "Then they'll have to go through me first." The ride to Caleb's cabin was slow and careful, Clara holding the baby close while Caleb led the horse on foot, his free hand steadying her whenever the trail grew rough. The moon rose pale and cold overhead, casting long shadows across the prairie. Clara's mind whirled with questions and fears. She knew nothing about this baby, whose it was, where it came from, why it had been abandoned. But she knew one thing with absolute certainty. She would not let anyone take it from her. By the time they reached the cabin, Clara was exhausted, her arms aching, but she refused to let go of the child. Caleb pushed the door open and ushered her inside. The cabin was small but warm, the fire in the hearth casting a golden glow across the simple furnishings. Caleb quickly stoked the flames higher, then fetched a soft blanket from a trunk. Clara sank into a rocking chair by the fire, finally able to take a closer look at the baby. It had a shock of dark hair and the tiniest, most perfect fingers she'd ever seen. The baby's cries had quieted into hiccuping sighs, and Clara's heart swelled so painfully she thought it might burst. Caleb crouched beside her, his rough hands surprisingly gentle as he adjusted the blanket around the infant. "You're a natural," he said quietly. Clara let out a shaky laugh, brushing a tear from her cheek. "I don't even know what I'm doing," she admitted. I never thought I'd—" Her voice caught on the memory of Agnes's cruel sneer. The hateful words burned into her soul. "You'll never be a mother." Clara looked down at the baby, her tears falling onto its soft blanket, and whispered fiercely, "They were wrong." Caleb's gaze softened, pride and something unspoken shining in his eyes. "You got more heart than all of them combined," he said. "That little one's lucky you found them." Clara shook her head slowly. "No," she whispered, kissing the baby's brow. I think I'm the lucky one." But outside, In the darkness beyond the warm circle of the cabin, a pair of unseen eyes watched from the trees, filled with malice and greed, and the fragile peace Clara had found was about to be threatened. The sun rose pale and cold over the prairie, painting the sky in streaks of dusty rose as Clara stirred in the rocking chair, her arms still cradling the baby she had refused to release even in sleep. Her body ached, her eyes were swollen from weeping, but for the first time in years, her heart beat with something more than grief. It beat with purpose. Caleb stood by the window, his silhouette dark against the light, his hand resting near the rifle propped beside the door. He had barely slept, his sharp gaze scanning the tree line as though he could feel the presence of danger lurking just beyond sight. When Clara shifted, the baby stirred and whimpered, and Caleb turned, his expression softening as his eyes met hers. "Morning," he said quietly, his voice rough but steady. "You held that little one all night." Clara nodded, her throat tight. "I was afraid. If I let go, it would feel like this was all just a dream." She kissed the baby's soft head and whispered, "But they're real. They're mine." Caleb crouched beside her, resting one calloused hand on the arm of the chair, his other gently brushing a stray tear from her cheek. "Clara, I need you to hear me. Whoever left this child out there didn't just vanish. People don't abandon a baby without reason, and sometimes those reasons are ugly." Clara's stomach tightened. "You think they'll come back for them?" Caleb's jaw clenched, his storm-gray eyes fierce. "If they do, they'll have to go through me." Clara stared at him, her breath catching. No one had ever spoken for her with such certainty, not even her late husband. She wanted to believe they were safe here, hidden in this cabin away from the judgment of the town, but fear gnawed at the edges of her fragile hope. "Caleb, the townsfolk, they already think the worst of me," she whispered, her voice trembling. "If they hear there's a baby here, they'll say I stole it to cover my shame." Caleb's gaze darkened with anger, not at her, but at the cruelty she had endured. "Let them talk," he said flatly. "I don't give a damn what lies they spread. I know the truth, and I'll make sure anyone who comes near you or this child knows it too." His words wrapped around Clara like a shield, and for a moment she allowed herself to believe in his strength. As she rocked the baby, its tiny hand curling around her finger, she whispered, "I don't even know its name, Caleb. How do you love someone you just met this much?" Caleb's voice softened, deep and certain. "Because you've been waiting for them your whole life, even if you didn't know it." Clara's tears fell freely then, her grief and joy mingling in a torrent she couldn't hold back. Caleb rose and crossed to the window again, scanning the horizon. "I'm going into town today," he said. "We need supplies, milk, cloth, whatever that little one needs. I'll keep my head down and be back before sundown." Clara's heart lurched. "You can't leave us here alone," she said desperately. "What if—" He turned sharply, his eyes locking on hers with a promise etched deep in his gaze. "Nothing will happen to you while I'm gone. Bolt the door, keep the rifle close, and if anyone comes near, you don't open it for anyone but me." Clara swallowed hard, nodding even as fear twisted in her gut. Caleb's hand brushed the baby's cheek before he left, his voice barely above a whisper. "I'll protect you both, Clara, no matter what it costs." As the door closed behind him, Clara held the baby tighter, rocking slowly as the silence of the cabin settled around her. She didn't see the shadow moving through the trees, a dark figure tracking Caleb's every move, nor did she hear the faint snap of a twig beneath a boot heel as danger crept closer, intent on claiming what had been left behind. Caleb's boots pounded the hard-packed earth as he rode into town, his jaw tight beneath the brim of his hat, every muscle coiled with tension. He hated leaving Clara and the baby alone, but they couldn't survive on courage alone. They needed milk, blankets, and medicine, and he knew Clara wouldn't last another day without proper supplies. As he tied Jasper to the hitching post outside the general store, a wave of silence rippled through the street. Heads turned, whispers spread like wildfire, and Caleb instantly knew the poison of gossip had already taken root. Inside the store, the shopkeeper stiffened when he saw him, glancing toward a pair of women huddled near the shelves. "Morning, Caleb," he said with false cheer, his eyes sliding away. "Word is you've been keeping company with, well, someone unexpected." Caleb's storm-gray eyes narrowed. "If you've got something to say it plain." One of the women sneered, her voice carrying through the store. "We heard Clara came crawling to your place after her husband's funeral, crying like a lost pup. Folks are saying she stole a baby to make up for what she couldn't give her husband." Her companion giggled cruelly. "A barren woman suddenly turning up with a newborn? Doesn't take a genius to figure out the truth." Caleb's temper snapped like a whip. In 2 long strides he was standing over them, his shadow falling across their smug faces. "The only truth here," he growled, his voice low and dangerous, "is that you all think you've got the right to spit on a woman who's already suffered enough. Clara didn't steal anything. That baby was abandoned, left to die. She saved it, and I'll damn well protect both of them." The women shrank back, their smugness faltering, but the damage was done. Outside, more townsfolk gathered, drawn by the confrontation. Murmurs rippled through the crowd, half disbelief, half hunger for scandal. Matthew, Clara's late husband's cousin, stepped forward, his sharp-featured face twisted with satisfaction. "Funny thing, Caleb," he said loudly, his voice dripping with false concern. "I went by Clara's old place yesterday, found a trail leading right toward your land. Seems to me she planned this all along, lure you in with a sob story, claim some stranger's baby, and trick you into playing the hero." Caleb's fists clenched at his sides. "You lying snake," he spat. "You know Clara's got more honor in her little finger than you'll ever have." Matthew smirked, raising his hands in mock surrender. "Believe what you want, but the whole town's talking now. If you keep sheltering her, you'll go down with her." Caleb stepped closer, his voice like a blade. "Let them talk. I'll burn this whole damn town down before I let anyone lay a hand on her or that baby." His vow sent a ripple of unease through the crowd, and for a brief moment, no one dared challenge him. Caleb grabbed the supplies he needed, slammed coins on the counter, and stormed out without another word, his long strides carrying him back to Jasper. As he rode hard for home, fury burned in his chest. Behind him, Matthew watched with narrowed eyes, a slow, sinister smile curling his lips. Back at the cabin, Clara rocked the baby while the fire crackled softly, trying to calm the gnawing unease in her belly. She didn't know what was being said in town, but she could feel the storm gathering. Outside, in the woods beyond the cabin, shadows moved silently. 2 figures crouched near the tree line, watching the cabin with cold, greedy eyes. One whispered to the other, "That's where the baby is. Tonight, we take it back." Inside, Clara hummed softly to soothe the child, unaware that danger was closing in like a tightening noose. Clara's unease grew heavier with every passing hour, a weight pressing against her chest as she rocked the baby beside the fire, the warm crackle of the flames unable to drown out the echo of the cruel words that haunted her. "You'll never be a mother." She tried to push them aside, focusing on the tiny heartbeat against her chest, but her instincts screamed that something was wrong. When the baby stirred and whimpered, she kissed its soft head and whispered promises of safety she wasn't sure she could keep. Outside, the wind rattled the shutters, and every sound seemed sharper, more dangerous. At last, she heard the familiar rhythm of hooves, and bolted to the door, relief flooding her when Caleb's silhouette emerged through the trees. But the moment he swung down from Jasper, she saw the tension etched deep into his face, the set of his jaw like iron. "What happened?" she asked urgently, clutching the baby tighter. Caleb's storm-gray eyes were darker than she'd ever seen them as he placed a sack of supplies on the table. "The town's eating up Matthew's lies like pigs at a trough," he said, his voice rough with fury. "He's telling anyone who'll listen that you planned all this, that you stole this baby to trap me and cover your shame." Clara staggered back as if struck, her breath catching in her throat. "No," she whispered, shaking her head violently. "He knows that's not true. Why would he—" Caleb's hands closed gently around her trembling shoulders. "Because it's easier to destroy you than to admit his own greed. He wants your husband's land, Clara. If you're ruined in the eyes of the town, he gets everything." Tears spilled down Clara's cheeks, falling onto the baby's blanket. "I can't fight him, Caleb. I don't have a voice, not against men like him." Caleb's grip tightened, his gaze fierce. "Then I'll be your voice. Let them talk all they want. I'll stand between you and every damn lie they tell." Before Clara could reply, a heavy knock rattled the door, loud and sudden. Caleb shoved her behind him and grabbed his rifle, every muscle taut with readiness. When he yanked the door open, Matthew stood on the porch, flanked by two rough-looking men with shifty eyes. His expression was all mock politeness, but Clara saw the malice simmering beneath it. "Evening, cousin," Matthew drawled. "I heard you've been busy playing house out here with a woman who doesn't belong to you, and a baby that ain't hers." Clara gasped, clutching the child protectively. Caleb's voice was cold as steel. "Say what you came to say, Matthew, and get off my land." Matthew's smirk widened. "Simple enough. Hand over the baby, and this whole mess disappears. You keep sheltering her, and the whole town will come knocking, with torches." Clara's heart lurched. "No," she cried, her voice breaking. "This child was abandoned. They'll die without me." Matthew's gaze turned vicious. "That baby is worth more than you can imagine. Someone out there will pay handsomely to have it back. You think I came all this way just for family honor?" Caleb's finger tightened on the trigger. "You're not leaving here with that child," he said, his voice low and deadly. For a moment the world held its breath, the only sound the baby's soft whimpering. Then Matthew sneered and backed away slowly, holding up his hands. "Think on it, Caleb. Sooner or later you'll realize you can't fight the whole town." As he mounted his horse, he threw one last venomous glance at Clara. "You'll never be a mother, cousin. Not when I'm done with you." When they were gone, Caleb slammed the door and turned to Clara, his jaw tight with rage. "He won't stop now," he said grimly. "We've got to be ready." Clara clutched the baby close, her tears soaking its blanket as dread settled over her like a storm cloud. Somewhere deep inside, a spark of defiance flickered to life. But she knew that before this was over, they would face a battle that could cost them everything. Caleb didn't sleep that night, his storm-gray eyes burning like coals as he paced the cabin, every creak of the floorboards a reminder of the danger pressing in around them. Clara sat in the rocking chair, clutching the baby close, her white shawl draped around both of them as though it could shield them from Matthew's lies and the hatred of the town. The child slept peacefully, unaware of the storm brewing outside. Clara's heart ached as she watched Caleb, his shoulders tense, his face hard with determination. "You can't fight them all," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Matthew has turned everyone against us. If they believe him, they'll come here and take the baby, and there's nothing we can do." Caleb stopped pacing and turned toward her, his expression fierce. "There is something I can do," he said. "If they want someone to blame, let it be me. If I stand beside you openly, as more than just a protector. They'll have to look me in the eye before they speak their poison. Clara's breath caught. What are you saying? Caleb crouched beside her, his large hands covering hers where they gripped the baby's blanket. I'm saying I'll claim you and the baby as my family, he said, his voice steady but thick with emotion. We'll ride into town together. Let them see us. Let them whisper. If they call you a thief, they'll be calling me one too. And I won't let anyone's lies touch you without touching me first. Clara's tears spilled freely. But Caleb, you'd be sacrificing your name, your reputation. They'll hate you too. A wry smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. My name's just a word, Clara. You and this little one, you're what matters. The next morning, Caleb saddled Jasper and helped Clara mount carefully, wrapping her and the baby in his coat against the chill. As they rode into town, whispers rose like a dark tide, spreading from porch to porch, street to street. By the time they reached the square, a crowd had gathered, their eyes sharp with judgment. Clara sat tall in the saddle, though her heart pounded so loud she thought it might burst. Caleb dismounted and helped her down, keeping one arm firmly around her shoulders as he faced the crowd. Matthew pushed through the throng, his smug face twisted into a mask of false outrage. Look at this, he bellowed, his voice carrying. Parading her sin through our streets, flaunting a stolen baby like a trophy. Have you no shame, Caleb? Caleb's jaw flexed, but his voice was calm, commanding. The only shame here belongs to those who turned their backs on an innocent woman and a helpless child. Clara didn't steal anything. She saved that baby's life. A murmur rippled through the crowd, some faces softening, others hardening in defiance. Matthew sneered. So you admit you've taken her in? You'd risk your name for a barren woman with a lie in her arms? Caleb stepped forward, his presence radiating unshakable strength. I'm not risking anything, he said loudly. I'm making a choice. Clara is my family now. This child is mine to protect. If you have a problem with that, you'll answer to me. The square fell silent, the tension so thick it seemed to press on every chest. Matthew's face darkened with fury, but he saw the way some townsfolk shifted uncomfortably, doubt creeping into their expressions. He spat in the dirt. You'll regret this, Caleb, he hissed. You can't fight everyone forever. Caleb didn't flinch. Watch me, he said simply. He guided Clara back onto Jasper and rode out of town, his arm wrapped around her, his vow ringing in every ear. Back at the cabin, Clara collapsed against him, sobbing with a mixture of fear and gratitude. You didn't have to do that, she whispered. Caleb cupped her face, his voice soft but certain. I'd do it 100 times over. As long as I breathe, no one will take you or that baby from me. Outside, unseen by either of them, Matthew watched from the trees, his eyes cold and calculating. His voice was a promise of vengeance carried on the wind. Then we'll see what breath you have left after tonight. The night settled over the prairie like a suffocating blanket, the wind howling through the trees as Clara sat in the rocking chair with the baby cradled in her arms, her white shawl wrapped tightly around them both, while Caleb stoked the fire, every muscle in his body tense as though he could feel danger creeping closer. He hadn't taken his hand off the rifle all evening, pacing between the windows and the door, his storm-gray eyes sharp with unspoken worry. Clara tried to calm herself by humming softly to the baby, but her voice shook with fear. Caleb, she whispered, maybe we should run, take the baby and disappear before Matthew comes back. Caleb turned to her, his jaw set like stone. We're done running, Clara. If we leave, Matthew wins, and the whole town will think his lies were true. This is our home, and we stand our ground. Clara wanted to believe him, but the shadows seemed to move outside, and every creak of the cabin made her heart race. Suddenly, The baby stirred and whimpered. And in that moment a loud crash shattered the night as the front door burst inward, splinters flying. 3 men in rough coats stormed inside, their faces twisted with greed and malice. Matthew stepping in behind them with a triumphant sneer. "Told you he couldn't protect you forever," he spat. Clara screamed and clutched the baby tighter, retreating toward the corner as Caleb raised his rifle. "Stay back!" Caleb's voice thundered like the crack of a whip. But the intruders kept coming, circling him like wolves. One lunged, and Caleb swung the rifle like a club, knocking the man to the floor, but another tackled him from the side, and the cabin erupted into chaos. Clara pressed herself against the wall, shielding the baby with her body as Matthew advanced on her, his hand outstretched. "Give me the child, Clara," he snarled. "It's worth more than you'll ever be." Clara's terror ignited into a blazing fury, and she screamed, "Never!" clutching the baby as she darted behind the table. Caleb fought like a man possessed, slamming his attacker against the hearth, the crack of bone loud in the confined space. Blood streamed from a gash on his brow, but he didn't falter. "Clara, get down!" he roared, firing a shot that sent one of the men scrambling backward with a howl of pain. Matthew cursed and lunged toward Clara, grabbing her shawl, yanking her backward. The baby wailed, its cries piercing the chaos. Caleb saw red and charged, slamming into Matthew with the force of a charging bull, sending him crashing into the wall. "You'll never touch her again," Caleb bellowed, his fists raining down until Matthew lay groaning and broken on the floor. The remaining men fled into the night, their courage shattered. Silence fell, broken only by Clara's sobs and the baby's cries. Caleb staggered to her side, blood dripping into his eyes, his hands trembling as he cupped her face. "Are you hurt?" he rasped. Clara shook her head, clutching him fiercely. "You saved us," she whispered. "You nearly died for us." Caleb pulled her close, his voice hoarse but resolute. "I'd do it again, 1,000 times over. You and that child are my whole world." Clara's tears soaked his shirt as she whispered, "I thought I was cursed, that I'd never be a mother, never belong to anyone. But you—" Caleb kissed her forehead, cutting her off. "You belong here, Clara. You always did." Outside, the wind howled, carrying Matthew's defeated groans into the darkness as the first light of dawn began to creep over the horizon, signaling that the final battle for truth and love had only just begun. The morning sun rose blood-red over the prairie, casting a harsh light on the wreckage of the night before. The cabin's door hung crooked on broken hinges, splintered wood scattered across the porch like fallen leaves, the floorboards inside stained with the ugly proof of the fight that had taken place. Caleb stood at the window, his face pale beneath the fresh bandage Clara had wrapped around his brow, his storm-gray eyes burning with a mix of fury and determination as he watched smoke rising from the distant town. Clara sat on the rocking chair, the baby nestled against her chest, her white shawl wrapped protectively around them both, as if she could shield the child from the venom of the world. Her hands shook as she rocked. Not from weakness, but from the decision she had made while Caleb slept fitfully after the attack. She could no longer hide, no longer cower beneath shame and whispers, while Matthew poisoned everyone with lies. If she stayed silent, Caleb's sacrifice would mean nothing, and the baby would never be safe. When Caleb turned from the window and saw the unshakable resolve in her tear-bright eyes, his heart clenched. "Clara, what are you thinking?" he asked, his voice rough. Clara rose slowly, clutching the baby close, her shoulders squared despite her trembling knees. "I'm going into town," she said, her voice steady. "I'm going to face them, all of them. I'll tell the truth, no matter what it costs." Caleb's hands curled into fists. "It's too dangerous. Matthew still has allies there. If you speak out, they might—" Clara stepped closer, cutting him off with a fierce look he'd never seen from her before. "They've already taken everything from me, Caleb. My name, my dignity, my peace. If I let them take my voice too, then I've already lost. This isn't just about me anymore. It's about this child and the future we'll build." Caleb stared at her for a long moment, pride and fear warring in his eyes, then finally nodded, his voice low. "If you go, I go with you." When they reached the town square, the crowd was already gathered, drawn by rumors of the previous night's violence. Faces turned as Clara walked forward, her white shawl glowing like a beacon in the harsh sunlight, Caleb's solid presence at her side. Matthew was there, his arm in a sling, his face bruised but his sneer still firmly in place. He raised his voice the moment he saw them, shouting, "There she is! The thief, the liar, parading a stolen child while this fool cowboy plays her protector." Gasps rippled through the crowd, but Clara didn't flinch. She stepped onto the church steps, holding the baby high so everyone could see, her voice ringing out clear and strong. "This child was abandoned," she declared, "left to die alone in the dark. Caleb and I found them and brought them into our home. That is the only truth that matters." The crowd shifted uneasily, murmurs spreading. Matthew laughed harshly. "And we're just supposed to take your word for it? You've always been a disappointment, Clara. You couldn't give your husband a child, so you stole one to fool us all." Clara's eyes blazed with righteous fire as she lifted her chin. "I have been silent too long. I am not barren, I am not cursed. I am a mother now, whether you believe it or not, because love makes a family, not blood." A hush fell over the crowd as her words echoed through the square. Some townsfolk lowered their heads in shame, while others looked at Matthew with doubt. Caleb stepped forward then, his voice a rumble of thunder. "Anyone who wants to harm this woman or this child will answer to me." Matthew's face darkened, fury twisting his features as he realized the tide was turning, the crowd slipping from his grasp. Clara held the baby close and whispered fiercely, "They'll never silence us again." The square was deathly silent for a heartbeat, the kind of silence that comes before a storm. Clara stood tall on the church steps, her white shawl glowing in the sunlight as the baby nestled against her chest, its soft cries punctuating the tension. Matthew's face was twisted with rage, his sling-bound arm clutched against his body as he shouted, "Don't listen to her! She's nothing but a liar who tricked this fool cowboy into believing her sob story. That baby's worth money and she knows it." His words sliced through the crowd, but instead of the agreement he expected, there was a ripple of unease. One older woman near the front shook her head, her voice trembling as she said, "I saw the truth in her eyes when she spoke. No liar talks like that." Others began murmuring, some siding with Clara, others clinging to Matthew's lies, the square teetering on the edge of chaos. Caleb stepped forward then, his broad frame blocking Matthew's path, his storm-gray eyes blazing with unshakable resolve. "Enough!" he thundered, his voice carrying over the restless crowd. "You want to shame her, Matthew? Then shame me too, because I've stood by her every step of the way, and I always will." He turned to face the people gathered around them, his chest rising and falling with each powerful breath. "This woman didn't steal anything. She saved a life, and in doing so, she saved mine too. You think her worth is measured by lies and gossip? You're wrong. Her worth is measured by courage, by the love she gives to that child, and by the way she's willing to face you all despite every cruel word you've thrown at her." Gasps rippled through the crowd as Caleb dropped to one knee before Clara, his calloused hands reaching for hers. Clara's breath caught, tears welling in her eyes as she stared down at him, unable to comprehend what was happening. Caleb's voice softened, but carried with fierce intensity. "Clara, you came into my life when I had nothing but silence and shadows. You showed me what it means to fight for something worth protecting. Today, in front of everyone who ever doubted you, I'm asking you to let me fight for you forever." He glanced at the crowd, then back to her, his jaw tight with emotion. "Marry me. Let this town see that our family is built on love, not their lies." Clara's knees nearly buckled as the world blurred through her tears. She wanted to speak, to say yes. But Matthew's furious shout cut through the moment. "This is madness. You'll regret this, Caleb. If you marry her, you'll destroy everything you've worked for. She's ruined, and so will you be." Caleb surged to his feet, standing nose to nose with Matthew, his voice low and deadly. "The only thing ruined here is your soul, Matthew. You'd sell an innocent child for coin and watch a woman suffer just to feed your pride." He turned back to Clara, extending his hand once more, his eyes shining with a love so fierce it made her heart ache. "Clara, please, give me the honor of standing beside you no matter what comes." Clara clutched the baby tightly with one arm and reached for Caleb's hand with the other, her tears falling freely. "Yes," she whispered, her voice breaking but strong enough for the whole town to hear. "Yes, Caleb, I will." A cheer broke through the crowd, tentative at first, then swelling as more and more townsfolk began to clap and shout, their voices rising in support. Even those who had doubted her now turned on Matthew, their glares cutting sharper than knives. Matthew's face turned crimson with rage, but he saw the shift in the crowd and knew he had lost. With a curse, he shoved past them and fled toward his horse, disappearing in a cloud of dust. Caleb gathered Clara and the baby into his arms, holding them close as he whispered, "From this day forward, no one will ever question who you are again." Clara rested her head against his chest, the baby safe between them. And for the first time, she felt the weight of shame lift, replaced by the boundless strength of love and belonging. The day of the wedding dawned clear and bright, the early sun spilling golden light over the prairie as if to bless the union that would silence every whisper of doubt. Clara stood inside the small wooden church, her hands trembling as she adjusted the white shawl draped over her head and shoulders. That shawl had once been her hiding place, the symbol of her shame, but today it would become a crown of triumph. In her arms, the baby gurgled softly, wrapped in a new blanket Caleb had bought with the last of his savings, proof of the family they had built through love rather than blood. Outside, the townsfolk gathered, drawn by curiosity and the promise of a spectacle, their faces a mixture of awe, guilt, and wonder. Caleb waited at the front of the church, his storm-gray eyes never leaving the door, his rugged frame steady and sure. When the doors finally opened, Clara stepped forward, her chin held high despite the tears glimmering in her eyes. A hush fell over the crowd as she walked slowly down the aisle, the baby cradled to her chest, her every step a defiance of the cruel voices that had once cursed her. Caleb's heart pounded as he took her hand, his grip warm and strong. The preacher's voice rose above the silence, reciting the vows with reverence, but to Clara and Caleb, the words were more than ritual. They were a promise forged in fire and sacrifice. When it came time for Caleb to speak, his voice rang out steady and clear, reaching every corner of the church. "Before God and before this town, I vow to protect Clara and this child with everything I am. I vow to stand against any lie, any cruelty, any darkness that tries to take them from me. They are my family, my heart, my home." Clara's tears spilled over, her voice trembling but strong as she answered, "And I vow to never hide again, to stand beside you in truth and love. They told me I would never be a mother, that I would never belong. But they were wrong. With you, I have found both." The preacher smiled and lifted his hands. "By the power vested in me, I declare you husband and wife." A roar of cheers erupted from the crowd, louder and more heartfelt than Clara could have imagined. Even those who had doubted her wept openly, some stepping forward to murmur apologies, others bowing their heads in shame. Matthew was nowhere to be seen, his power over the town broken forever by the sight of Clara's courage and Caleb's devotion. As they stepped outside into the sunlight, Clara felt a strange stillness settle over her. She paused at the very spot where she had once fled the church in disgrace, her face hidden beneath this same shawl, her ears ringing with hateful words. Now she stood with Caleb's hand in hers, and the baby nestled safely between them, the white shawl glowing in the sunlight as a symbol of rebirth. Caleb bent close, his lips brushing her ear as he whispered the words that had changed her life on that first terrible night. "They said you'd never be a mother," he murmured, his voice thick with emotion. "They were wrong. You are now." Clara's heart swelled as she kissed the baby's soft brow, tears of joy streaming down her face. Together they walked down the steps and into the waiting crowd, no longer fugitives from shame, but a family forged by love and defiance. As the townsfolk parted to let them pass, Clara caught sight of a small patch of wildflowers growing stubbornly through the cracks in the dusty street. She smiled through her tears, knowing that like those flowers, she had survived the storm. The final image was of Caleb, Clara, and the baby riding away toward the horizon, the white shawl fluttering in the breeze behind them, a banner of redemption and homecoming for all to see.